They lived in the same luxury apartment, same corridor, same floor, same silence after every fight. Every meeting ended the same way: sharp words, wounded pride, doors slammed hard enough to echo, no greetings, no smiles. Just tension thick enough to feel. They never imagined their lives would ever cross beyond arguments. Then December arrived, one phone call each, same warning. Same deadline: come home with someone, or we will choose for you. They traveled home separately, angry, confident, ready to reject whoever was waiting. But the moment they walked into the sitting room, time stopped. The person their parents had chosen was not a stranger. It was the one person they never wanted to see again. What followed was not love, it was silence, locked doors, unspoken truths, and a night that would change everything. Because when two enemies are forced to face each other without escape, secrets surface, walls fall, and sometimes, hatred reveals something far more dangerous: love. Daniel Okoye lived in Emerald Heights, a high-end apartment complex known for its order, privacy, and quiet comfort. It was the kind of place successful people chose when they wanted peace after long days of chasing money and ambition. Daniel fit perfectly into that world. He was disciplined, structured, and proud of the life he had built for himself. Every detail around him mattered, from how cars were parked to how noise was controlled after working hours. His peace was non-negotiable. That peace, however, began to crack the day Emily Harper moved into the apartment next door. Emily was everything Daniel was not: bold, expressive, and effortlessly confident. She dressed well, spoke freely, entertained guests, and lived her life without apologizing for it. Their first serious clash happened over parking. One evening, Daniel returned late from work to find Emily's guest parked in his designated space. When he knocked politely to complain, Emily dismissed it casually, saying it was temporary and that he should not make a big deal out of it. To Daniel, it was a very big deal. Voices rose, pride stepped in, and neither of them backed down. From that moment, every meeting became a battle. Daniel accused Emily of ignoring building rules, while Emily accused Daniel of acting like he owned the place. They quarreled over late-night visitors, loud laughter during business calls, and generator fumes drifting across balconies. These were not small fights, they were adult confrontations driven by ego and control. Neighbors noticed. Some laughed quietly. Others avoided crossing paths with either of them. Daniel and Emily became known as the war next door, two strong personalities colliding whenever fate placed them in the same space. Behind the noise and insults, however, both Daniel and Emily were carrying quiet pressure that neither spoke about. Daniel's parents had begun calling more frequently as December approached. His mother's voice was always gentle but firm, reminding him that Christmas was near and that tradition mattered. She told him clearly that if he did not come home with a woman this year, the family would choose one for him. Daniel laughed it off on the phone, but when the calls ended, the words stayed with him. Emily faced similar pressure, though hers came louder and more direct. Her parents reminded her that success did not replace marriage and that arrangements had already been discussed in the village. Emily argued fiercely, insisting she would never accept a husband chosen for her. Yet when she ended those calls, silence followed, heavy with uncertainty. Both Daniel and Emily believed they were in control of their lives, yet neither had anyone special. They were single, stubborn, and determined to prove something, to themselves, to their families, and to the world. As Christmas crept closer, tension filled the apartment corridor, and neither of them knew that the person they fought most was already tied to their destiny. December arrived quickly, bringing with it decorations, holiday traffic, and growing pressure for Daniel and Emily. For Daniel, every reminder of Christmas felt like a countdown he was losing. His parents' calls increased, and the jokes about grandchildren slowly disappeared, replaced by serious conversations about responsibility and tradition. Determined not to be cornered, Daniel threw himself into dating with the same seriousness he applied to business. He accepted blind dates, went to dinners arranged by colleagues, and even allowed his mother to suggest someone she believed was reasonable. None of it worked. Some women were impressed only by his bank balance. Others rushed conversations toward marriage without understanding him. A few complained that he was too quiet, too controlled, too boring. Each failed meeting left him more irritated than before, and that irritation often followed him home. One night, after returning from another awkward dinner, Daniel ran into Emily in the elevator. She was dressed elegantly, clearly returning from somewhere important. The air between them tightened instantly. When the lift paused longer than usual, Daniel muttered about unnecessary delays. Emily snapped back, accusing him of always finding fault. The argument spilled into the hallway, loud and sharp, fueled by stress neither of them wanted to admit. Emily's search was no easier. Friends tried to help, introducing her to men they described as serious, but seriousness often came with insecurity. Some men were intimidated by her confidence. Others expected her to reduce herself to make them comfortable. One suggested she should slow down her career if marriage was to work. She ended that conversation immediately. Each disappointment strengthened her resistance to being pressured, yet doubt crept in during quiet moments. Her parents' voices echoed in her mind, reminding her that Christmas was close and decisions had been made. One evening, after ending a long call with her father, Emily stood on her balcony trying to calm herself. At the same time, Daniel stepped onto his own balcony to take a business call. Their eyes met briefly across the space. Instead of silence, accusation followed. Emily accused him of listening. Daniel replied that her voice traveled too far. The argument that followed was familiar, almost routine, yet beneath it lay shared fear and frustration. That night, in separate apartments, both booked tickets home for Christmas, believing they were heading toward different futures, unaware that their paths were about to collide. The journey home felt longer than usual for Daniel. The closer he got to the village, the heavier his thoughts became. His parents welcomed him warmly, but Daniel noticed the quiet excitement in their voices. His mother smiled more than usual, and his father spoke proudly about family plans already set in motion. Daniel protested, insisting he was not ready for marriage, but his words were brushed aside. Tradition, they said, had its time. At Emily's home, the atmosphere was similar. Her parents welcomed her with open arms and gentle firmness. They spoke of patience, destiny, and promises made years ago. Emily argued fiercely, insisting she would not be forced into marriage, but her parents remained calm, confident that time would soften her resistance. The day of the formal family meeting arrived quickly. Daniel entered the sitting room first, adjusting his shirt, prepared to politely reject whoever was presented to him. When Emily walked in moments later, the room froze. Their eyes locked. Shock, disbelief, and anger collided at once. "You!" they both exclaimed. Words poured out as they spoke over each other, revealing their constant quarrels in the city. Their parents stared in confusion, struggling to understand how two strangers to them could know each other so well. When Daniel and Emily finally stopped talking, they spoke in unison. They could not marry. The declaration was firm and immediate. Silence followed. The parents exchanged glances, calm and unshaken. They explained that the families were not related, that the match had been carefully considered, and that destiny sometimes arrived in unexpected ways. Daniel and Emily refused to listen. They accused their parents of manipulation, insisting that dislike could never turn into love. That night, tension filled both households. Arguments continued long after dinner, voices rising and falling as pride battled tradition. Daniel and Emily felt betrayed, convinced that no one understood them. What they did not realize was that their parents believed they were protecting them from loneliness they refused to admit. As night deepened, a decision was quietly made, one that would force silence where arguments had failed. Late that night, after another heated argument, Daniel and Emily were led into a large guest room under the pretense of discussion. Before either could react, the door was locked from the outside. At first, anger exploded. Emily accused Daniel of cooperating with the plan. Daniel accused Emily of being impossible. Insults flew freely, sharp and familiar. But as minutes turned into hours, exhaustion replaced fury. Silence crept in, heavy and uncomfortable. With nothing else to do, they began to talk, not to argue, but to explain. Daniel spoke about his childhood, his drive to succeed, and his fear of losing control over his life. Emily shared her struggles, her independence, and her refusal to shrink herself for anyone. For the first time, they listened without interrupting. Without realizing it, walls began to crack. As the night stretched on, laughter replaced tension. They laughed at old arguments, at how ridiculous their fights must have looked to neighbors. Emily realized Daniel was not arrogant, only deeply disciplined. Daniel saw that Emily was not rude, only honest and expressive. When morning light crept through the window, something had changed. They were no longer enemies trapped together, but two people beginning to understand each other. When the door finally opened, the parents noticed the difference immediately. There were no raised voices, no angry protests. Only quiet reflection and confusion over unfamiliar feelings neither Daniel nor Emily was ready to name. Morning came gently after the long night they had spent locked together, and with it came an unfamiliar calm between Daniel and Emily. There were no sharp words, no sarcastic comments, no deliberate avoidance. Instead, there was an awkward politeness that felt heavier than their former fights. Daniel noticed it first when Emily greeted him quietly during breakfast, her tone softer than he had ever heard. It unsettled him more than her shouting ever did. As the day went on, their parents deliberately kept them busy together, sending them to the market, asking them to help with chores, and assigning them tasks that required cooperation. At first, they worked in silence, each pretending the other did not exist beyond necessity. But silence has a way of forcing reflection. Daniel found himself observing Emily closely, noticing how respectful she was with elders, how easily she laughed with children, and how confidently she carried herself without arrogance. Emily, on her part, began to see Daniel differently too. She noticed his patience, how he listened before speaking, and how seriously he took responsibility. These small discoveries confused them. They were used to seeing each other as problems, not people. When a minor disagreement arose at the market over prices, they handled it together, exchanging looks instead of insults, and when it was resolved, they both laughed quietly, surprised by how natural teamwork felt. That laughter lingered longer than either of them expected, settling somewhere deep and uncomfortable. As the days passed, that discomfort grew into something warmer. Conversations started happening without effort, about work in the city, about dreams they once buried, about how lonely success could feel. They shared meals under the mango tree, walked through the village in the evenings, and slowly forgot to keep emotional distance. Villagers began to notice. Whispers followed them wherever they went, some teasing, some approving. Daniel caught himself looking forward to Emily's voice, and Emily found comfort in Daniel's presence, especially when her parents spoke about tradition and expectations. One evening, after a long walk, they sat quietly watching the sunset, neither in a hurry to leave. The silence between them was no longer tense, it was peaceful. Emily broke it first, admitting she had misjudged him. Daniel smiled and confessed he had been unfair too. That honesty felt like crossing a line they could never return from. Neither spoke of love yet, but both felt it hovering, undeniable. The truth settled in slowly and clearly, what they had called hatred was never hatred at all. It had been two strong people refusing to admit curiosity, attraction, and interest. By the time night fell, Daniel and Emily understood something important: they were no longer fighting destiny. They were beginning to walk toward it, willingly, even if neither was ready to say the word. The night air was cool, scented with the lingering warmth of the day's sun, as Daniel and Emily sat on the veranda of the guest house. The silence between them was different now, comfortable, almost intimate. Daniel had tried to focus on the stars above, but he kept stealing glances at Emily. Her laughter earlier while helping her mother in the kitchen had lingered in his mind, soft and melodic, and he could not deny the flutter it caused in his chest. Emily, in turn, felt a strange calm being near him, noticing his disciplined posture, the seriousness in his eyes, and yet the kindness he showed to everyone around him. Neither wanted to speak at first, but both felt the weight of words unsaid. Daniel finally broke the silence, admitting, almost shyly, that he had misjudged her, that he had allowed irritation to cloud his judgment for far too long. Emily looked at him, startled, then laughed softly, realizing she had done the exact same thing. Their laughter faded into quiet reflection. In that moment, they understood that beneath their quarrels had always been curiosity, admiration, and now, slowly, affection. The truth was undeniable, they were drawn to each other, more than they had ever been willing to admit, and yet, fear and pride had kept them silent for far too long. Encouraged by the honesty in their shared laughter, Emily spoke next, her voice low but confident. She confessed that she had noticed Daniel's patience, his reliability, and the way he treated others with respect. She admitted that her initial irritation had masked admiration, and that she found herself enjoying his presence more than she ever wanted to admit. Daniel smiled, feeling relief and exhilaration at the same time, realizing he felt the same. They spoke long into the night, sharing stories from the city, family pressures, dreams, and disappointments, revealing themselves in ways neither had allowed before. By the time they finally rose to go inside, a quiet understanding had settled over them. What began as a forced closeness had grown into genuine connection. They were no longer enemies bound by pride, nor neighbors clashing over trivialities, they were two adults recognizing each other for who they truly were. And in that recognition lay the spark of love, soft but persistent, ready to grow, a love neither expected but both were willing to explore. The night ended with them walking back to the guest house silently, hearts lightened, minds racing, knowing that everything had changed, yet neither dared to say it aloud. The days that followed were filled with excitement, chaos, and laughter as Daniel and Emily helped their families prepare for what was now understood to be a wedding they would share. Though neither had said the words love or marriage aloud to each other yet, their actions betrayed a growing closeness. Daniel found himself assisting Emily with selecting fabrics for her wedding dress, his usually stern demeanor softening whenever she laughed at his overly meticulous suggestions. Emily, in turn, teased him relentlessly, pointing out that he had become almost as careful about her comfort as he was about following his own schedules in the city. Both laughed at how ridiculous it was that quarrels they had spent months cultivating in the apartment had evaporated into cooperation and subtle flirtation. Villagers watched with amusement and approval, noting how the pair who had once shouted at each other from the staircase now moved together effortlessly, discussing arrangements and solving small problems side by side. From seating plans to food, decorations to music, every task became a game in which they competed for efficiency, teased each other mercilessly, and discovered that arguing could be fun when there was no bitterness attached. By now, the playful tension between them had evolved into quiet admiration. Daniel found her stubbornness endearing, and Emily noticed his protective instincts were genuine and tender. Even in these busy days, their thoughts often wandered back to their city quarrels, now remembered with humor rather than frustration. They shared quiet moments, sneaking smiles at one another during family conversations, exchanging subtle touches while carrying trays of food, and catching each other's eyes across the courtyard during errands. The combination of laughter, teasing, and teamwork allowed them to see qualities in each other that had previously been invisible behind walls of pride and irritation. Both began to feel anticipation for a future neither had planned, yet one that now seemed inevitable. There was excitement in discovering the unknown, the realization that someone who had once been a constant source of stress could become a source of joy. And despite the seriousness of the upcoming wedding, they found themselves savoring every small moment, cooking together, planning music, trying on outfits, and simply walking through the village in each other's company. For the first time, Daniel and Emily understood that love could grow from unexpected beginnings, that laughter could heal old grudges, and that two strong personalities, when aligned, could create harmony from chaos. The preparations became more than tradition, they became a joyful prelude to a relationship neither of them had ever imagined, yet both were secretly embracing with open hearts. The morning of Christmas arrived with the village bathed in golden sunlight, birds singing as if they, too, celebrated the union about to take place. Daniel stood at the altar, dressed in a sharply tailored suit, his posture calm but his mind racing with anticipation. Emily appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in a flowing white dress that seemed to glow against the vibrant backdrop of the village, every movement elegant and confident. For a moment, the world fell away, leaving only the two of them, the neighbors who had shouted at each other in the city, argued over trivialities, and resisted fate, now standing together, ready to promise a lifetime of partnership. The villagers watched with smiles, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how far the once quarreling pair had come, others murmuring that destiny had a sense of humor. Daniel's heart pounded as Emily approached, and for the first time, he allowed himself to embrace not just the day but the feelings he had been denying for weeks. Emily, too, felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of pride, joy, and relief. She reached him, and without a word, their hands found each other's, a silent acknowledgement that whatever quarrels had existed before, they belonged together now. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking of love, respect, and the merging of two lives, but Daniel and Emily were too absorbed in each other to focus on any words but those exchanged silently through glances, smiles, and subtle touches. As vows were exchanged, laughter and tears mingled in equal measure. Emily promised to stand by Daniel through life's challenges, and Daniel vowed to cherish Emily's spirit and strength, the very traits that had once frustrated him but now had become the foundation of their connection. When rings were slipped onto fingers, the crowd erupted into cheers, and Daniel and Emily shared a quiet, intimate moment amid the joyous noise, recognizing the journey they had taken, from enemies across a city corridor to soulmates standing under the bright Christmas sky. The reception that followed was filled with music, dancing, and heartfelt congratulations, with the village celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of love born from understanding, patience, and unexpected circumstances. Even in their joking and teasing during the festivities, the subtle intimacy between them shone, a reminder that the fiery debates and stubbornness of the past had led them here, to a love richer and more enduring than either could have imagined. By the time the sun set, Daniel and Emily were no longer just partners in tradition, they were partners in life, laughter, and love, united in a way that had once seemed impossible, but now felt entirely inevitable. Their Christmas wedding had become a testament to destiny, patience, and the surprising beauty of love found in the most unlikely places.